Hello, and welcome to the Scriptures Are Real podcast, the podcast where we look at elements of the Scriptures that have become very real to us and thus have allowed us to draw more power out of the Scriptures. I'm your host, Kerry, and this is one of those little shortcasts where I don't have a guest. I just want to talk about a couple of things myself. And today we're going to talk about a story in the Scriptures that we've referred to actually a number of times. We referred to this story in my interview with Camille Frank-Olsen, and I believe both of our interviews with about Joseph, one with Stephen Smoot and one with Joe Spencer. They've not both been released at this point. I think only one has been, but the other will come next week. But we keep referencing this odd little chapter, chapter 38, that's smack dab in the middle of the Joseph story. So chapter 37 is where the Joseph story starts. And then you get this interruption with the story of Judah, and then you're back to the Joseph story. And I would say, in a way, it serves as a foil. It is highlighting the difference between Judah, who will sleep with a harlot in this story, and Joseph, who runs away from his woman who is trying to sleep with him in the following chapter. And so there's a real kind of literary device here called a foil, where you're contrasting the two characters to learn something of them. But I think it's more than that. It's also, as we've mentioned in some of the other episodes, this is a time where I think we start to see a growth in Judah. He's not painted particularly well in this picture, but I think there's growth that we see. And it's also important to investigate this story because both David and the Savior will come from the union that is discussed in this story. So let's jump into it and see if we can bring into it a number of elements that for me, when I learned this about the ancient world, it just made it come alive for me. And I said, that's what's going on here. So we have Judah at the beginning of chapter 38. Judah marries a Canaanite. Her name is Shua, and she gives him three sons, and Onan, and Shelah. And those are his three sons by this Canaanite woman. We don't know about other sons. This is what we know. So Judah then helps his firstborn son, marry a woman named Tamar. And Tamar, in many ways, is the heroine of this story, and she's certainly an ancestress of both David and Christ. And so let's look at what happens with Tamar. She marries Judah's firstborn son, but is wicked. We can see in verse 7, is wicked, and he is slain by the Lord. We don't get any more information about it. It could be just that he dies young, and people assume it's because he's wicked and the Lord slew him, or I don't know. But in any case, he dies. Now, this brings up a really important element in ancient Near Eastern civilizations, that if we understand this, it will just make this story make more sense to us. And it will seem weird to us. The story seems weird to us. And when I first discuss this, it will seem weird to you, but I think eventually you'll say, that makes sense. What we're going to encounter here, and this isn't the only time we'll encounter this in the Old Testament, but it's an important time, and I believe it's the first time, we're encountering a law called the Levirate law of marriage. It comes from the Akkadian word levir, which means brother-in-law, or basically brother-in-law. So what the deal is that when someone is married, when a woman is married, she leaves her family and becomes part of her husband's family. And at this point, it is her husband's family's duty to take care of her, to care for her. Of course, that falls primarily to her husband, but it's to the whole family. Now, it's not only a matter of caring, but it's a matter of making sure that seed doesn't die out. So what the worst thing that can happen is for a man to marry a woman, and then he dies before they have children. Now there's no one to care for his wife. Typically, when you get older and you can't care for yourself, it's the job of your children to care for you. But if there are no children, who's going to care for his wife? And moreover, he doesn't have any descendants, and so his line dies out. So in a law that seems very weird to us, but really was a law born out of charity, out of wanting to make sure people were taken care of, the Levirate law of marriage means that the husband's family has the responsibility of taking care of his widow and providing her with a child that will then take care of her, and through whose seed the line can go on. So it is the job of typically the brother-in-law, the next oldest brother, to take care of this woman. And one of the ways will be it's a kind of a marriage. So it's not a normal marriage. It's a different kind of a marriage, but it is a kind of marriage. And so the duty of both of them is for her to become pregnant by this brother-in-law, the dead husband's brother, who then the child from that union will not be the living brother's. It will be counted as the dead brother's child. And thus his inheritance goes to that child. His name goes through that child, and so on. Even though he is dead and the child is not actually his, it has become his. And that allows both for that line to go on and for this widow to have a child who will take care of her as she grows older. So this is also part of what the birthright responsibility is that now you have the resources to take care of this woman until she has a child that can take care of her, and so on. But this is really just the family taking care of someone who is going to need to be taken care of. And so once has died, we get in verse 8, Judah, who is helping. He's in charge of this family still. He's still alive. Often these things are happening after the father has died, and the oldest son is kind of running things. In this case, the oldest son has died, but the father is still around. So he comes into play in this as well. He has a responsibility to take care of his daughter-in-law and to make sure that his son's line doesn't die out. And so we get in verse 8 that Judah says to his next son, Onan, to go into his brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. So he's asking him to fulfill the levirate law of marriage, to provide a child for his dead brother and for Tamar. But Onan is not so happy about this because he sees that his inheritance will get divided. Right now, he gets the birthright inheritance. He gets all of his stuff and his brother's stuff. But as soon as his brother has a child, then his brother's inheritance will go to that child, and he loses some of that inheritance. And so what he does is he goes in to Tamar and basically fulfills the pleasurable elements of this union, but doesn't go through with the very final portion where you would have a child, the thing that would give you responsibility. Instead, it says he spills his seed on the ground so that she won't become pregnant. And so as a result, the Lord slays him as well. Again, I'm assuming that's what happened, although it could be he just dies right after this and they say that's why. I don't know. But in any case, he dies. So Judah says to his Tamar, his daughter-in-law, why don't you go to your father's house? Now, he's supposed to take care of her, but I think he's looking and saying, okay, this woman is not good for my sons. Everyone who hangs out with her dies. But he says, you go to your father's house until my next son is grown enough to fulfill these levirate responsibilities. And that's what she does. She goes back to her father's house. This is highly unusual. It's going to be embarrassing, shameful. It's not fulfilling their responsibility. All sorts of bad things about this. But she waits, and it turns out that Shelah grows. And in process of time, we learn in verse 12, Judah's wife dies, and he's going around, and he's at Timnath, and while he's there, Tamar hears that he is going to Timnath to shear his sheep. So he's got lots of sheep there, and he's going to be busy. So she stops dressing like a widow. See, she's dressing, and who knows how long this is, but it seems like it's quite a while. So she's dressing like a widow because she's trying to show people she's not available. She's tied to Judah's family. So she's not available. She technically is married to either Judah or his surviving son. Even though that marriage has not been consummated, she's technically married to them. So she's dressing as a widow so that no one will try and woo her or bother her or anything along those lines. But when she sees, and it does say that she sees that Shelah, this youngest son, has grown, and that Judah hasn't sent him to fulfill these levirate responsibilities, she gets the idea Judah's not going to do what he's supposed to do. No one's going to take care of me. No one's going to provide me with a child or my son with a child. And so she decides to take matters into her own hands. And she stops dressing like a widow. She covers herself with a veil, and in some ways so that it looks like she's a harlot. I don't know that it's completely clear, but at least somewhat she can be taken as a harlot. And Judah sees her, and his wife is dead, and I guess he's feeling lonely and frustrated and whatever else. And so he decides he would like to sleep with this harlot. And so he says, I'd like to come in unto you. And she says, what will your payment be? And he says, I'll send you a kid. And she says, okay, well, you can say you'll send me a kid, but I want some kind of pledge so that I know you will send me the kid, because you're not giving me anything right now. And so he gives her collateral, basically. And his collateral is a signet. It's probably this little thing that you roll in clay to have your seal on it, and some bracelets that seem to be uniquely his, and his staff. And he says, when you keep these, and when I send back the kid, or the baby goat or lamb, then you can give these back to me, but this is my collateral. So that's what he does, and he does sleep with her, and she does get pregnant when he sleeps with her. And then she arises, and she leaves, and Judah sends his friend to make the payment, but his friend can't find her anywhere. And then we get Judah saying, this isn't going to look good for me, but what else can I do? And then he is told that Tamar is pregnant. And he's very indignant. And he says, she's playing the harlot, right? Because technically she's still married to his family. How could she get pregnant? He knows he hasn't sent Shelah, so she's been playing the harlot, and he's very upset about this. So he's going to burn her. But we get verse 25. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are. So she's showing those little, the collateral he's given her, right? By the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet and the bracelets and the staff. And Judah acknowledged them. So Judah, you can imagine Judah like, oh, okay, I've been played here. I've been caught. And then he says, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not Shelah my son. And he knew her again no more. So you see what has happened. Tamar actually has not been immoral at all. Tamar has ensured that a marriage that was supposed to happen, it did happen. So she's married to the family, as it were, and she's supposed to get pregnant by one of the men in that family. And so she made that happen. Now, I think this is a case where two people engaging in the same act have different things going on with them. Judah technically was not being immoral either. This was something that either he or Shelah were supposed to do, but he didn't know that. So in his heart, he was intending to be immoral. So I would guess he is immoral. While in her heart, she is not intending to be immoral. She's intending to be moral, and she is within the law. So she's not immoral. So I think Tamar is moral here, and Judah is not. So that, I think it's a little way to highlight how the intents of our hearts matter here. And again, this levirate law produces a child that will be the ancestor of David and the ancestor of Christ. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Christ is born of a levirate line. In fact, we'll see it happens again with Ruth. So he's born twice from a two times levirate line, because this law is designed to preserve life, to preserve posterity, to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And that is a fantastic description of Christ, who takes care of us and does for us what we can't do for ourselves, and takes care of us in a way we can't take care of ourselves, and thus preserves our life and the opportunity for us to have eternal increase and family for forever. That's what the Savior did. And I think that's symbolized in this story. And so as I learned about the levirate law of marriage, that made this story become very real to me. I could understand better what was going on with Judah, with his sons, with Tamar, why they're doing what they're doing. I can feel the charity that's supposed to be behind this law, the lack of charity that's happening in Judah, and the lack of his morality, but also I can feel and see his recognizing, I see she helped me do what I was supposed to do. And I wonder if this isn't the beginning of Judah's kind of reform. I think probably he's already had some elements of reform in that he's seen Joseph suffering and so on, but as they sold him. And it may be that Judah wasn't so bad as we thought. Remember, the other option was to kill him. And so this may have just been Judah's way of trying to avoid that, though he certainly makes a buck off of it. But so I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what Judah is thinking and when, but I do think we see at least an element or a part of his reform that we'll see more fully later on in this story. And I think we see this levirate law and how it can help us appreciate and understand Christ and our obligations. Obviously, we don't practice the levirate law of marriage today, and even the thought of it gives people heebie-jeebies or whatever else. That's why this story seems so odd to us, but I think we do better if we see things from their cultural point of view, and this is one of our 7 C's, right? The culture, if we can look at things from their cultural point of view and see that this was an act of charity, then maybe there's another C in there, but this was an act of charity, a way of taking care of people. And it then causes me to stop and think, okay, we're not going to do the levirate law, but still, there are widows to be taken care of. There are widowers to be taken care of. There are families that are in need, and what is my role in that? So this has become very real to me and powerful to me, and it helps me understand the whole Joseph story better, and the Judah story, and the story of David and of Christ better. And I hope it does the same for you.